What is up, YouTube? This is the Working Investor. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about all my strategies that I am attempting to reduce my NAV erosion. Of course, when it comes to NAV erosion, this term, people get very afraid because these high yield dividend ETFs, they tend to drop in value. It's not the same way you look at it when you see a growth company. And the benefit is that the yield is super high. And sometimes it makes sense if you get 100% return on yield and you lost 10 or 20% in net asset value, you're still a winner because your total return is still 80%, which is phenomenal and astronomical. But if there is a way you can preserve your net asset value from dropping, then you could be a bigger winner. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm attempting to do this. And I'm going to show you every technique that I'm attempting. And so far, it seems to be working okay. But again, I've only been in this for a few weeks, so it's hard to extrapolate. Let me start with my first technique. The first technique is called core number compounding. So core number compounding is that, especially with these high yield dividend ETFs, you have an anticipation that it will drop. And every time there's an update in the market, instead of doing nothing and looking at your account value go up, I rip off the top. This is a technique I learned from Yieldmax TV. The second one also I learned from Yieldmax TV, which is the sandwich. But you could see just from this month alone, I received $1,300 and a bit in dividends. I almost received that same amount from selling the rips, selling into pumps on up days in the market. These are all my transactions that I've sold off into the pumps. You may wonder and say, when you sell off into pumps, then you're losing some of these high yield dividend shares. You're selling off some of the shares. Aren't you concerned that you're going to get less dividends? So my answer is that I am anticipating that these shares will eventually drop, and I'm focusing on the core number, which means the number that I invested in. Let's say I invest $10,000 into a fund. If I see it up to $11,000, I'm going to sell off that $1,000 and put it aside. I'm okay because I'm still made whole. I have my $10,000 right there in my account, and now it's making dividends, and I have that 1,000 on the side, which I can either keep it on the side if the fund goes down to 9,000. Like, it provides me a buffer to preserve my NAV, or I can use it for a separate underlying. So that's something that I use. It's called core number compounding. The second thing I do is I try to hedge, sort of, by using inverse funds. So with Yieldmax, they have inverse funds for multiple underlyings, and I am actually using almost every single one they have. I have for NVIDIA, I'm using dips. For Tesla, I'm using crash. For Coney, I'm using fiat. And I'm using the inverse funds because when the fund goes down, the inverse would go up and vice versa. So it's trying to keep my NAV stable. This is called the sandwich method. This is also a method by the Yieldmax TV, which I actually enjoy, and I am using it, and I'm finding it very useful. But what I do is I actually combine them. I do a whole collage between the two. So I actually sell when I see one position up. I sell from one fund and put the proceeds into the corresponding inverse fund, hence lowering my cost basis of my inverse fund. So setting myself up, if the market would tip the other way, I'll be ready, really hedged out, and vice versa. And if I sometimes both funds, like, you could see that my allocation is 7,500 in fiat and 7,500 in Coney. That's my core number. And you could see in this scenario, I'm up actually in both, and I have over $200 that I have in excess. So that's another method that I do, that if I have multiple sandwiches, and if one sandwich is a net excess and the other one's a net deficit, I can use the net excess to make myself whole where I have a net deficit. So there's the core number compounding, there's the hedging, even though the prospectus says don't use it as a hedge. I'm trying to use it as a hedge. It is very risky. Don't do what I do. And then there's, so that's the diversity of sandwiches spilling into the other. And then there's tax loss harvesting, which I haven't done yet. But let's say you want to use two assets that are different but similar. So, for example, Coney corresponds with the price of Bitcoin and correlates to the price of Bitcoin. So let's say if Coney would be really down, then fiat would be up. But then I could sell Coney, and let's say Bito or Misty would be down correspondingly because they correlate with the price of Bitcoin. So I could swap out the same value, let's say in Bito or Misty, just for example, and then not buy back Coney for, you have to look at the laws. I believe it's either 30 or 60 days, 31 or 61 days. Just don't buy it back. Otherwise and then I could have a paper loss in my account to offset some of the gains. And I'm not an accountant. You should really speak to an accountant and get proper professional advice. So these are some of the strategies that I'm using to try to mitigate it. Another thing I try to do is I try to avoid funds that really historically, I call them sinking funds, that perpetually just fall down to the ground. Like, I don't want to be picky, but I'm going to pick on IWMY, comes to mind, because look at this fund. It just looks like an escalator going a race to the bottom. They had a reverse split, but that's more cosmetic in my opinion. But it looks like it's a race to the bottom. I mean, right now it's down 34%. The dividends, you have to calculate the dividends for total return, but I hope the dividends is at least 34% since inception. Otherwise, I'm not sure how this would be worth it. And another one that comes to mind is Ulti. So I'm not just picking on the Defiance here, but I heard that Ulti changed their prospectus. But again, look, it's a race to the bottom. I don't see much recovery over here. So I tried to pick funds that historically have a better preservation in NAV, but past performance is not indicative of future gains, and you never know what will happen tomorrow, but you can just try your best. This is the Working Investor over and out. Hope you guys have a great day.